Sonic Movie and Equestria Girls Chapter 13, Shadow the Hedgehog. The next morning, all Sonic could remember was the events that transpired with Shadow. Then after, it was a pitch darkness until he heard a few voices crying out his name. It didn't take long as those voices got louder as the blue hedgehog started opening his eyes to see people surrounding him. Once he started to hear clearly, he opened his eyes fully to see everyone surrounding him, as it looked as if hours had gone by.
Sonic, speak to me. What happened?
Sonic slowly got himself up as he tried standing up, only for him to fall back down as Twilight could only catch him before laying him down.
Easy there. You took a pretty heavy hit. You shouldn't try pushing yourself so soon.
Sonic, what happened to Sunset? They took her. Shadow took her.
Took her where?
He took her to the space colony Ark.
We have to go now. The longer we stand here and do nothing, the longer Sunset is in danger.
Tails and Twilight looked at each other before they signaled everyone to gather up their things as Tails immediately started his ship, as they were only a few hours away from where they needed to be. Rainbow Dash could only carry the blue hedgehog along the way as she could only hope Sonic would make a full recovery. Back with Sunset Shimmer, she could only remember waking up as she sat up to see herself in bed, as she looked around to see herself inside a small and empty room. She looked outside the window to see nothing but space, as she realized that this place was none other than the space colony Ark. Before she could even think about standing up, she heard a partial voice, not too far away, and she looked over to see Shadow, kneeling back against the wall with his hands crossed.
What do you want from me?
Simple. The doctor told me to get information out of you since you are from another world too.
Like I tell you or that freak anything about me.
If you don't cooperate, the doctor will soon make you cooperate by force.
Yeah, well, I'd rather die than betray my friends back in Equestria. Whatever you plan to do to me won't work.
Don't make promises you can't keep.
How would you know anything about promises? All your loyalty goes to is an evil genius who cares about nothing but himself.
Shadow could only look on in annoyance as Sunset Shimmer stood up from her bed in defiance, while clenching her fists in anger.
I'd advise you to stay out of businesses that don't involve you.
No, I want to know one thing. Why do you hate humans so much to the point where you would want to destroy the planet? Most of us didn't even do anything wrong.
It felt like ages where Shadow wanted to burst into anger for such lies. How could she talk about those humans down below when they've brought so much pain into his life?
Don't talk as if you know those humans down there. Not after what happened here.
What are you even talking about?
Sunset Shimmer then started to walk closer to Shadow. Although she didn't like to use her powers without her user's consent, this was still her enemy, an enemy that she needed to stop before anything else. She could only walk up to the black hedgehog before touching his shoulders, as Shadow could only stare at the girl in both confusion and annoyance.
What are you doing?
I just want to know, what made you turn out like this?
Little did that black hedgehog know what Sunset Shimmer could really do, as Sunset Shimmer used her magic to see her enemy's past. Maybe, if she were to see what made him turn out this way, then she can try to help him. However, things would not go that way, as once she used her magic to see his memories, what she found was disturbing. Inside Sunset's mind, Sunset felt herself waking up in the middle of a hallway as she looked around, wondering what had just happened. Last thing she could remember was using her magic to see through Shadow's memories, only for her to end up here. Before she could process what her magic had done, she heard a voice call out to Shadow as she turned around to see Shadow running in the hallway, moving past her as he called out to the person's name. This version of the black hedgehog looked so young and shorter than what he was now.
Don't worry, Maria. I'm coming.
Sunset Shimmer was left stunned after seeing someone who she saw as an enemy look so innocent and fragile while running. Sunset followed the black hedgehog as he entered inside a room where he stood in front of a girl. When looking closely, this girl looked beautiful yet frail in appearance. She was a young human girl who was about 2 heads taller than Shadow. She had shoulder-length blonde hair, pale skin, and blue eyes. Her hair was wavy and held back with a blue hairband. For attire, she wore a dark blue puffy sleeve t-shirt with a light blue trim, a light blue knee-length skirt, and dark blue slippers.
Well, what is it, Maria? I heard you scream my name from the other side of the room.
I know. I was just calling you because it's time for bed.
Already? But I want to see the stars one more time.
Come on, Shadow. You know when our bedtime is. Unless you care more about the stars than your dear old friend. Oh, my heart just aches.
Maria could only laugh as Shadow innocently scrambled to his feet to make his way into bed alongside her. Shadow could only pout while looking the other way and crossing his arms.
I hate it when you guilt trip me like that.
Sorry, but it's my only way to get you to bed early.
Hey, Maria, could I ask you something?
What is it, Shadow?
It's just, the professor said his life's work was dedicated to all those who live down there. He told me that the reason I exist was to make people happy through the power of science, but what if I'm not what he made me to be? What if I'm not good enough? What if they hate me?
Don't feel like that, Shadow. I know that the people down there would welcome us, although I don't think some of them will, but that's okay. Humans have a distinct nature when it comes to good and evil. But even if the world doesn't like us down there, at least we'll have each other.
How can you be so sure about that?
You didn't forget, did you? We made a pinky promise on that, silly.
Where would we even go first? There's so many places down on Earth.
We'll figure that part out later, Shadow. Now come on, it's time for bed.
Shadow then felt himself being dragged down to the bed, while he felt Maria hugging him as the little black hedgehog could only look at the girl innocently. Shadow then felt himself being dragged down to the bed, while he felt Maria hugging him as the little black hedgehog could only look at the girl innocently.
When we get to Earth, I promise I'll find a way to make you happy. You can count on it.
Shadow then drifted up into bed along with Maria as Sunset Shimmer could only watch the scene with pure confusion and shock. So many questions popped up in her mind. Who was she? Why did her power take her here? And was this how Shadow was before everything that happened? Before Sunset Shimmer could move, she felt herself being dragged into another memory, as all she could remember was blinking before she was in the same hallway, except it was pitch black, with the only light that could be seen was red flashing lights, with the sound of alarms going off. She walked around to see what was going on before she heard the sound of screaming, as she saw a bunch of scientists huddle up into a corner. To her horror, she watched as they pleaded for their lives before being brutally shot down, as Sunset Shimmer covered her mouth, preventing her from screaming after seeing such a sight. She took a few steps back as the soldiers inside talked amongst one another.
We've just received orders from United Federation. Following orders have been sent and are strictly told to be followed. Anyone that knows about Project Shadow must be executed on sight and must not be left alive, with the exception of the Professor Gerald Robotnik, along with the Hedgehog. Destroy and leave no traces of its existence. Understood?
Yes, sir.
The unit then stated to spread out as Sunset Shimmer could only realize that they ordered to capture Shadow. She then sprinted off into the hallway to run back to the room where Shadow and Maria once were, only to find the room to appear empty. She could only hear more gunfire as she could only run as fast as she could to find the duo, as she stopped in her tracks to see Shadow running while grabbing Maria's hand. On their trail was a bunch of gun soldiers, as they ordered for them to stop, only for Shadow to throw an entry bolt up at the ceiling, which brought the debris down, which blocked their path.
Where are we going?
The professor ordered us to take one of the escape pods. We'll be safe on Earth once we land there.
Shadow and Maria ran inside a room where an escape pod could be seen, as Shadow tried to work the machine. Maria worked the controls as she held the controls for the escape pod in her hands. Sunset Shimmer could only hear footsteps behind her as she saw one of the soldiers appear from behind them as she tried warning them.
Watch out!
The soldier only fired his weapon, much to the surprise of Shadow and Maria, who barely had enough time to react in time. It felt like reality had slowed down for them as the bullet was aimed straight for Maria. Without a second thought, Sunset Shimmer tried to block the bullet for her, only for it to go past her. To their horror, the bullet had shot Maria, with both Shadow and Maria screaming in terror as the black hedgehog appeared in front of the soldier before punching his face so hard that the sound echoed across the room. Shadow immediately tried to rush to her aid. The blood on Maria's shirt was ever so present as she struggled to speak. She laid on the ground while Shadow held her arm as the black hedgehog saw her bleeding out.
No, 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 no. Maria, please stay with me.
I'm sorry, Shadow. I don't think I could come with you this time.
Maria, where are you saying? We're getting out of here together. I'm not leaving you behind.
I can't come with you, Shadow. It's too late for me. I'm sorry, I couldn't keep our promise to go to Earth together.
Stop saying such things, Maria. I can fix this. Just please, don't die on me.
I'm sorry, Shadow, but it's not up to me. It never was up to me. I'm just glad that I've got to spend the last of my moments with you.
Shadow could only hug Maria tightly as the girl could only smile sadly. The room echoed with Shadow's cries as Maria could only say one last thing to the black hedgehog.
If you don't mind me asking, could you make me one final promise to me, Shadow? I beg of you. Please do it for me. For a better future. For all the people who live on that planet. Give them a chance to be happy. Let them live for their dreams. Shadow, I know you can do it.
Shadow paid no attention to her words as he looked at Maria one last time. Maria then said her final words to her one and only friend. It was just then that he heard footsteps coming as more soldiers were coming. However, Shadow still stood by Maria's side.
Shadow, you have to go. You need to live for the both of us.
Maria, I can't just leave you here. I could go anywhere in time and space and never find anything as amazing as you.
Shadow could only refuse her words as he shook his head slowly. It was only when he felt her hand on his right cheek is when he saw Maria's eyes, as they were filled with tears and sorrow.
Please, Shadow, do it for me.
The footsteps from outside then started to become louder. Shadow could only shed more tears while Maria could only look at him one final time.
I love you, Shadow. Don't ever forget that.
It was only when she used the last of her strength to push him off her as the black hedgehog could only stand there in shock. He didn't have enough time though, as the footsteps were drawing in. As he entered the escape pod, the soldiers then entered the room with all of them preparing to fire at the black hedgehog. Shadow could only turn away in fear as he closed his eyes in fear for what was to come next. Luckily, with her last dying breath, Maria had pressed one of the buttons on the controller as the pod was then sunk downward into the planet below. Many memories flooded Maria as she watched her friend being sent down to the planet below. Her last thoughts in her mind became present as she spoke to herself.
That's the reason why you were brought into this world. Help them fix their mistakes and make new friends along the way too. I just wish I could have been there with you along the way. This is goodbye. Sayonara, Shadow the Hedgehog.
And with that, Maria could only close her eyes as the girl had succumbed to her injuries. While on the escape pod, Shadow could only be seen crying in agony. Sunset Shimmer could only watch the scene with pure horror and sadness. As before she collected her thoughts, she felt herself being pulled back to reality. Sunset blinked once more as she felt her hands being shoved away by Shadow, as he could only stare on in confusion, as she could feel the tears dripping from her face.
Get your hands off me.
Sunset Shimmer could only take a few steps back, as she could only be lost in thought after witnessing something like that. Shadow paid no attention, as he decided it would be best if he left, knowing that there was no use in cooperating.
I don't have time for this. There's no use in trying if you won't cooperate. I'll have to try this again another time, when I have this planet begging for mercy.
Shadow turned the other way before exiting the room, before it was shut locked, as Sunset Shimmer could only stumble back against the bed. The tears were ever so present, as she could recall everything that Shadow had went through, from his sadness, anger, and joy that he had with Maria. The feeling that Shadow had was similar to her own, being consumed by hatred and rage, made her relate to the Black Hedgehog even further. It didn't take long for Sunset Shimmer to quietly sob as she whispered to herself,
Shadow, I'm so sorry you had to go through something like that. I'm so sorry.
Little did she know that Shadow could still hear her from the outside, as he could only look on in both confusion and pity. The Black Hedgehog didn't even understand what her deal was. First she wakes up and insults him, and then touches his shoulder, before suddenly crying about him. Then again, she's the second human being that he's made contact with over 50 years. Shadow could only continue to walk down the empty hallway before recollecting on his thoughts. The tear could only fall down his face.
Why? Why of all people? Why does she remind me of you, Maria?
Shadow could only shake his head as he tried to get his mind off of Sunset, only for it to pop back up again. This person, this girl, reminded him so much of Maria, yet he denied those feelings to ever make friends with humans, especially with the ones that took his friend away. All that was left was revenge, and he was sure to keep that promise. However, little did that Shadow know that Sunset Shimmer would find out more about him, as Sunset Shimmer could only observe her surroundings to see a bookshelf containing a bunch of books and letters. Most of these had more information about Shadow, but the one that caught her eye was that of a diary. This diary belonged to Maria, as Sunset opened the book to see the first page, as it said,
My first friend, Shadow the Hedgehog.